And a good Friday afternoon to everybody. We had some scheduling conflicts this week, so we're going to have to mesh a couple different interviews together for this week's Eyewitness News PolitiCast, focus on Stan Ellis's ascension to becoming the one and only and perhaps top candidate for Assembly District 32. That, of course, filling the role that Vince Fong had left going into Congress in Washington, D.C. Hope you enjoy. He's received several endorsements already, and that's probably about as nice of a start as you can possibly hope for getting a bunch of Republican endorsements, including former Congresswoman Connie Conway, David Valadao in there as well. Is this thing open and shut just about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that people fail to appreciate about endorsements is what it says about what's going on behind the scenes, right? So, we sort of think about endorsements often as a way to send a signal to voters, right? Well, this is somebody that supports them. So, and obviously they're sort of former candidates and individuals, but we also heavily lean, into the signal sent by the Firefighters Association or a particular union or the California Chamber of Commerce. But I think the thing that you really see when you see these individual high profile endorsements from one party or the other from that sort of area, former members or current members of the legislature or of Congress, other party leaders from around the region and state, what you're really seeing is when those line up, it's sort of sending the signal to other candidates from the same party. Don't get in, right? Don't ruffle the sort of like don't sort of air the dirty laundry, so to speak, right? And I think what it's telling you is that it's going to not just send the signal to voters that this person has the endorsement of these sort of Republican stalwarts, but it's also going to tell other candidates that you don't have that endorsement. And if you get in here and you cause us to have to spend extra money, you sort of divide our electorate, and you kind of create a conversation about the internal disagreements within sort of Republicans in the region. That's uncomfortable for us, right? That's a waste of resources for us. And so in as much as, you think of these sort of, candidacies as being heavily coordinated by and kind of allowed, so to speak, by the local sort of party, party leaders, I think it tells you that it's open and shut, not just because he'll have the votes, but because the other candidates are just going to be heavily discouraged.
We want to bring in someone who knows this district very well, Brittany Martinez, former Kevin McCarthy, California Communications Director. Brittany, what can you tell us just about Kern County and the way that this area votes and the fact that you have all these big names lined up behind a particular candidate? We haven't really seen any policy from this person particularly just yet, but maybe those endorsements kind of give us an idea of what to expect.
I'd say that he's in a great spot. Right now he's got the big endorsements. No one else has thrown their hat in the ring just yet. And that deadline is obviously coming up for someone to do so. And in Kern County, especially like in Bakersfield, and I was so fortunate I got to work in the area as long as I did with these folks, is that they have a tendency to stick together, and so I think that's a great thing for him in this situation. And time will tell, I suppose, but in this moment, he is obviously ahead of the pack. He's the only one in the pack, and if it continues that way, then he'll be set up for success.
I think a lot of times in recent years, when we think about when you have a heavy district partisan leaning one way, whether it's Republican or Democrat, is you have the names that back the one candidate that then people would start to throw in the term establishment because he has all those endorsements. And usually what ends up happening is you have someone running to the extreme of him to counteract it in that same partisan lane. So in this case, maybe someone who would be more conservative or more right wing per se would be coming through. Do you expect anyone to jump into this race and try and challenge him from that angle? Or when you look at the pile of endorsements that this person has, that Stan Ellis has, it's kind of tough to go in and run any sort of lane around him.
Yeah, if I was eyeing that seat, those endorsements would definitely make me reconsider. Now, that's not to say that you can't, and the only way to win was with endorsements. At the end of the day, the only vote that matters is the one that'll be on election day and how the constituencies vote at the ballot box. But, I think, like I said, that he is in an incredible spot to be in right now. And when we think about Fong and Valadao, and they're two very well-known members of Congress in the area. Obviously, Valdeo's been around for a while. Fong is going to be entering his second. I don't know. Is he like a freshman 2.0 or like a freshman sophomore, like Frosh Soph? I'm not totally sure what, but his new this new Congress, and so having been able to be there this year and Valedale for a while, I think that they bring a lot of experience, obviously, and will be able to sort of, their endorsement matters.
Very tough to find a name with significant recognition that would then be easier to remember than this person if you're someone who's in Bakersfield. There's no name recognition candidate that seems to be higher when you have all these endorsements. He wasn't necessarily a high profile person to begin with, but when you see all these endorsements roll in, it's tough to see. And we were talking before we started, of course, about Ken Weir, who was running this assembly campaign, a write-in campaign initially against Vince Fong. Vince Fong even endorsed Weir because he said, "Hey, I'm not serving on this seat." And Weir did not get those votes cast. We haven't heard of whether or not he would decide to run for this seat against Ellis, but given all these heavy hitter endorsements, and given what happened with the Kern County Republican Party in this last election with a lot of failed local endorsements, it would seem like it would be a tough hill to climb for Weir to try and get in this race against Ellis or any other semi-recognizable name, given all the heavy hitters that have endorsed him.
I think so. And I think the other piece to consider here, especially I mean, this is a really weird district, right? Or I should say weird seat, in a weird area in the sense that it tends to be an intra-party competition for these seats, meaning we're seeing Republicans against Republicans at the congressional level when they make it to the runoff, at the state, assembly and Senate levels, in a lot of these local races. And so what happens as a result of this is on the one hand, if there's going to be competition, it's got to be from inside the party. And sometimes, there's going to be people that, just want to put their hat in the ring. But there's also sort of a turn taking that happens, right? Where, if you go in and kind of jump in line or make things more difficult, you're not going to get your turn. Right. Where if you sort of be patient and you work, up through the system within the party in that region, I do think that, and this is true of the Democratic and the Republican parties, and I think it's kind of ubiquitous across regions in the state and the nation, right? These local and state party organizations and to an extent the national party organizations, they try to coordinate the sort of rise of candidates to make sure that resources and name recognition and endorsements are all lining up in a proper way. And so, in a way that's most effective. And so in this sort of, instance, especially where we have a Republican versus Republicans when we get these fights, I think candidates are very sensitive about saying, okay, am I going to ruffle feathers if I jump in now? And am I going to lose my turn in line, to kind of come up for the seat when it's my time? Is there another place I might fit in that I could go run and fill that role for now to kind of, could I go run for a city council, for a special district, for a water board, for for a school board? And so I think those are the kinds of things that, when we talk about coordinating candidates and candidates kind of waiting their turn, they're trying to find places to shuffle these candidates and bring them up through the ranks, for those that are the most talented. I also think, this cuts against a little bit one of these interesting, things that you see where if you do get sometimes, most of the time, I think this plays out in districts that are a little more competitive. But even in races where it's both parties, or it's both candidates from the same party, one of the reasons you run in a seat you can't win is to increase your name recognition for future runs. And that kind of cuts in the other direction, right? Why is Weir going to run in a seat where he almost certainly is going to get beat by Vince Fong, right? And even with the endorsement, even with Fong's endorsement in the seat that Fong's in, he doesn't win, he doesn't make it at the write-in campaign. What does that make sense? Well, yeah, it could be just that he has things to say and there's an opportunity and he just wants to run. But I think more than that is like he's looking at it and he's going, well, as long as I get in a way that's tactful and not, sort of doesn't upset the apple cart of the party, maybe I just go and I kind of make a name recognition for myself. And so now when I want to run for that next seat, I kind of have a little more profile and I have a little more of a launching pad to get myself in a good position, to get the endorsements that I need, to get the money that I need to run the campaign, and to get the sort of name recognition that I need for the voters to come out and check the box for me. And so I do think that there's sort of, they're countervailing forces here sometimes about when a candidate who's really kind of a losing candidate, so to speak, who's not the favorite, jumps into a race anyway, versus when a candidate decides to wait their turn. And I think it's the subtleties of whether or not the party is kind of endorsing that kind of minority, that losing run, right? Is the party saying, yeah, it's okay, just don't, as long as you don't make too much ruckus, go ahead and jump in, get your name out there, have a polite debate with the sort of our leading candidate, and then let the election take place the way that it does.
Representation matters too in a district that's been left alone for almost it will be nearly a year since Vince had left in June of last year. And even if he wins this plurality, because he's getting voted on in February of this year, on February 25th, you'll take a month to certify the results, and then after that, it may not even be till April. I mean, that's 10 months or so. If he gets more than 50% in February, if he doesn't get more than 50% in February, well, then it's got to go to this runoff in April, and then another month to certify in May, and maybe a swearing in June. It could literally be a year. What does it mean to have this 1 year, 10-month to 1 year gap in representation?
I think that it is just a great reminder of how convoluted the system is in California, how we're still counting ballots for an election that was over a month ago. And that is such a travesty. I mean, the folks need and deserve to be represented by someone in Congress, by someone at the state and local level, at the state capitol, right? And with this assembly seat. So I think that's crazy. And to your point earlier that I didn't fully touch on, my apologies, is when we were talking about sort of these establishment people. The good thing, I guess, that Ellis has that's working in his favor when it comes to that is that he is a businessman, and that sort of is his background. And as we know, in Kern County and like in the Bakersfield area especially, we have a lot of small business owners and people who are greatly involved in the community. So I think that is going to be to his benefit and help him when he gets to this seat, which I think at this point is inevitable, which makes it even more of a travesty that it could take an additional extra couple of months when we see the writing on the wall. So why do we have to wait, an additional 2 months on top of the year or whatever that we've already been waiting? I think that we need to get someone up there quickly.
Is it fair to play the devil's advocate argument too, which is that if this was a Democratic leaning seat that, you wanted that person to, let's put the example, if we think about Kevin McCarthy, we can maybe think about Nancy Pelosi in that way, a long time Democrat in the state of California. If she were to leave and the person who was in the state Senate or state assembly were to ascend there, you would think that seat in the state legislature would get filled a lot faster than this Republican deep red seat would.
I like to think that there's an equal playing field for everybody. I don't think that's necessarily the case in California. Obviously, the Democrats have a supermajority and Newsom is governor. And so I don't want to be conspiratorial in any way at all, but, maybe there would be a little bit more of a fire lit under certain top legislators in the state to do something like that. But also, I guess you could say whether this seat was filled by a Republican or a Democrat, it doesn't really matter because Democrats have such a majority anyway. But of course, as a Republican who understands that region fairly well, I like to think these people deserve and need to have someone represent them ASAP.
The timeline of this is February 25th for the first for the primary. Now, unlike last time where we didn't have the polling that would suggest that we can get two people that could go to a runoff, if Ellis is running uncontested or the other candidates aren't too well known, there's a chance that as long as he gets over 50%, he could win and go directly into the state legislature. Now, if he were to still get around 45%, get those top two finished, he would have to go to a runoff in April. Can you just talk to us about what a turnout looks like in a weird February election that only covers a portion of Kern County?
Well, I think, just return to an earlier point very briefly, which is say this is even more incentive for the Republicans to want to make sure that there's not another Republican in that race, because that's the thing that really threatens his ability to get over that 50% mark, right? I mean, if he's facing one other person, and certainly if that person's, not a Republican, he's almost certainly going to get over that threshold, and they're going to have he's going to have a spot in the legislature more quickly. I mean, it could be just a shockingly low turnout election. And when you mentioned, the Boudreaux versus Fong, special election, and well, the sort of special election that had multiple candidates, and then the Boudreaux versus Fong follow-up special election that was the general special election. I don't know how to qualify the special general, the general special. I don't know. Those were, off cycle, even in an election year where there was a lot more people, sort of paying attention, and they're pretty darn low turnout, right? Because it's the only thing that's on the ballot, and it's kind of at a time when people aren't expecting to show up to vote, and it looks like a foregone conclusion. I mean, I have a feeling that people are going to be sort of exhausted, You know, we've just had this sort of very intense election cycle. I think people tend to be a little tired of seeing commercials. They're tired of hearing about candidates. They're hung over from, either the excitement of the win or the depression of the loss, depending on which side they were on at the national level. And I just think, you could very well see that combined with the fact that this might look like a race that's open and shut. It could be a shockingly low turnout race. And ultimately, you might think that in a race where there were a couple of candidates and maybe something weird could happen because you don't need that many more votes to shake things up and get over get ahead, in terms of walking, precincts and knocking on doors. Maybe you turn out a bunch of people that didn't expect to be turned out. I'd be surprised in this district. I think it's going to be pretty low turnout and pretty straightforward in terms of the outcome.
A couple questions for you when we think about in this particular race when we're looking at and in representation per se as well, with him being in the state assembly, as you touched upon, that the majorities don't necessarily help him, the supermajority from a Democrat point of view, but there are little things that you can do, and there are still things that you can reach across the aisle with. I think of State Senator Shannon Grove this last year with a human trafficking bill that was able to reach across the aisle. But the other thing that he does, and it's interesting that Vince Vaughn and David Valadao have endorsed him, which is that there's things that he can take back to them in Washington that are saying, hey, these are some issues that I'm seeing on the ground here in this district. This is maybe something to look at as well. That kind of collaboration helps as well than just kind of talking to someone who's, wasn't there before and is talking about issues that maybe the state can't handle, that maybe the federal government can't handle. His being there has that little bit of aid to it, doesn't it?
It does. And when I think back to working for McCarthy and when Fong was an assemblyman himself, those were things that were constantly sort of at the top of mind, right? And so we were dealing with water issues, for example, on the federal level, but so much of it is local and at the state level. And, also when we were talking to mayors and like city councils, right? So politics ultimately is local and that collaboration is incredibly important. And so having him in that seat is going to help elevate things absolutely to both Congressman Fong and Valadao.
And last question for you here. I mean, we're thinking about a series of special elections that have happened over the last year, from the two windows involving Vince Fong. We've had a couple of tax measures in Kern County as well. We were now going to have another school board election, and folks are hearing this on the news constantly, all these special elections going on. What type of influence does that have, do you think, on the turnout and on the interest of people going to go vote for this election? Because they might say, hey, you know what? This is a lot. I've got to do my day-to-day job, or I got to see my kids and feed my kids. This isn't something that's necessarily top of mind. What can we expect from turnout in that way, especially this being also in a cold month of February?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, turnout is always the best in a presidential year, and then in midterm years, they drop off. And in a special election, especially if Ellis is running against no one, right? I mean, I can see, I could see a situation where folks are busy and maybe can't make it to vote that day. But I think at the end of the day, it depends on what sort of grassroots campaign and get out the vote campaign you're running. And of course, though, he is at this moment up against no one. And so I guess it's an easier race to run in theory, getting some votes and 50% of them, or over 50% of them is obviously going to really matter. And, if I were him, I would act like I am running the toughest race of my life against the toughest competitor and that it's going to be extremely close because, you never know what will happen in the state of California.
And if that's the case, I mean, depending on if he can win, you will hopefully no longer hear Eyewitness News say the word special election for at least maybe another 4 or 5 months. We'll have that little bit of window in time in between because someone maybe inevitably pulls out. But for the time being, we haven't had that break in my entire time of the couple of years that I've been here to say something that doesn't involve
Yeah.
special election. So,
Yeah.
Brittany, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me back.